welcome to the YWCA's food demonstration. This is the third of a series of 3, all leading up to our YWCA Health Fair, January 8th, 2022. Today we have a wonderful presenter with one of our organizations that partner with us. So without further ado, I'll let her come in and introduce herself.
Hello everyone, I'm Kathy Hohenstein. I'm the Family Consumer Science Agent at Cooperative Extension. I think you've seen Amanda. She was with you the first demonstration. So today we're going to be actually doing a white bean soup. It has white beans. You can choose to do dry beans and prepare them, or do canned beans. Talk about that a little bit later. And it has spinach, tomatoes, and just the basics: onions, celery, and a little bit of garlic with the stock. So it's a pretty simple soup, but it is one that is really tasty. And I got it from the diabetes self-management. So it is one that really fits into if you're trying to watch your sugar levels and diabetes. So to start off, what you want to do, if you are preparing your dry beans, you want to go ahead and prepare them. You can do a soak method overnight, and if you need more information around that, you can let us know. But you can prepare them overnight, or do a quick preparation where you will be cooking them up for about 5 to 10 minutes and then letting them sit for about an hour, and then they're ready to go. So we do have some beans that have been prepared, so we'll be using those today. If I use canned beans, I go ahead and rinse them really well to get the sodium off of them, as well as to go ahead and it gets rid of some of the ingredients that cause you some digestive gas. So that's another tip on their canned beans. So to start off, we will go ahead and we actually saute the onions, celery. I use a little bit of garlic and olive oil, and add the beans. So we'll let that get hot. So I just use a little bit of olive oil. You can use canola oil. Those are 2 very good oils to use if you're going to be cooking. And I just use enough to kind of coat the pan to get the onions and the celery going. So I'll let that heat up. And while we're waiting for that to heat up, I'll go ahead and just tell you a few tips around your dry beans. They are really healthy protein. They're a plant protein. They have a lot of fiber, as well as calcium and iron. And that fiber really helps you kind of feel full from your beans. So when you're eating a bean, any of your beans in any of your dishes, it's one way of getting a lot of good proteins in without a lot of extra calories and a lot of extra fats. So they are a pretty low-fat food, as well as being one that is pretty high in carbohydrates, but you release those carbohydrates slowly. So they're a good form and are very high in protein. So they fit within the Mediterranean lifestyle, as well as many of the other cultural foods that you might want to be trying. When I'm working with onions and sauteing, I'll put a few in just to kind of time the heat of the oil to make sure that it's getting hot enough to saute them. And in this dish too, I'm going to be talking about using the crock pot to kind of keep it warm so that it can be a dish that you can use throughout the day. In our busy lifestyle at home, we have one person coming in for dinner at 6, somebody else is at 7. It's a nice way to have that dinner ready for when different family members are getting home, when we can't eat together. So we'll start off by doing our onions. We use about 1 large onion. You could use 1.5 small onions, about 3 stalks, 3.5 stalks of celery. And pretty much I'm a garlic person, so I'll add garlic to whatever dish I'm making. So even if it doesn't call for it, I'll often add it. So this is just a couple cloves of garlic, and I just mince them small. You can choose to use garlic powder if you want. You want to just be careful about using garlic salts. That will add a lot of extra unneeded sodium to your diet. So I'll let this get started. What we do is kind of get the onions translucent. And when they're cooking, you can start to really smell the aromas from the celery and the onions, and it really can kind of give you a nice warm feeling in the kitchen. Usually I have someone coming in, checking in to see what I'm making once I get started. We're gonna move this along. I'm gonna go ahead and add my beans. And again, I prepared these beans. If you want to soak them overnight, it's a good idea to go ahead and soak them in the refrigerator. It's a little bit safer, kind of keeping them out of that room temperature. But I would give them a good 12 hours or even 24 hours if you want to for soaking them. And what you're doing now is you're just kind of getting them cooked up a little bit. You're going to get those onions and celery starting to cook and soften up, and bringing out those flavors that are going to really make that soup have a nice taste. If you want, you can also choose to use other types of beans. The ones I'm using today are what I call white kidney beans, or the cannellini beans. I always get that name mixed up. But they're a nice white bean, but you can also use navy beans. You can choose to use even red beans if you want. I like using the white beans in this soup because it also gives a nice color combination with the tomatoes and the spinach later on. I often get questions too around using the one pot or the Instapots, kind of the pressure cookers, and that can be a really good way to prepare your dry beans. So what you want to do is look for the instructions that come with your cooker, but you can prepare your dry beans in your pressure cooker, and that actually gets them nice and soft and kind of gets them prepared and for when you want to use them in your dishes. And so you could also do this recipe in your Instapot as well. You'll be changing it to using it more as a slow cooker later on once the soup's prepared. But preparing those beans ahead of time, you can use them as the pressure cooker. So you're going to let these cook. Usually it takes about a good 5 minutes or so. And then what I'll do once I kind of get those onions looking translucent, that's when I go ahead and I will go ahead and use the soup stock. So I'm using just a vegetable soup stock. It calls for 4 cups. And so I'll be adding that. And I like using the vegetable soup stock because I'll go ahead and it gives me just a little bit more of the plant ingredients and a little bit less of the animal ingredients. So it's kind of a nice way to make a vegetarian or a vegan dish for your friends. I have a few that they prefer that, so it's a nice dish for me to bring if we're doing a potluck or something like that. So again, you're going to go ahead and kind of get this broth going. You're going to have the broth, the beans, you're going to have also the onions and the celery, and then once I kind of get the broth in there, we're going to add some sage. Sage is kind of the ingredient and the flavor for this soup. And it calls for about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon. And so usually what I'll do is I'll start the soup, I usually start it on the stove, kind of like I'm doing here. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and let this cook up for a while, get it simmering. And once it starts really simmering and cooking for about half an hour, after that time I'll transfer it to my slow cooker and I'll add the tomatoes and the spinach. So we'll go ahead and kind of give it a few minutes on the stove like I normally do. Normally I'll do 30 minutes, but we'll just kind of quick prepare it today. I have some already made up for tasting. But again, with this recipe, you want to kind of give those beans some time to cook. Otherwise they'll be too tough. And that 30 minutes is a good time, whether you're using the canned beans or the dried beans. So once it's been kind of simmering and cooking for a while, we'll go ahead and we'll add it to the crock pot, and it'll kind of finish that cooking process in the crock pot with the tomatoes and the spinach. I might be out of frame. Hopefully you can still see me.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just going to use 1 can of tomatoes, diced tomatoes, and about a cup to a cup and a half of spinach. And you just add that all to the crock pot, and then what you're going to do is set that crock pot. I usually do another hour or so on high, and then reduce it down to the keeping it warm and the low setting. So I'll put it on high and put my lid on. This is a nice lid that can keep it from spilling if I'm transporting it, but I just put the lid on, and then I'll leave it like that for about an hour. And then once that hour is up, I'll slowly put it back down to warm. They just keep it warm for when everybody's coming home to eat. And so to take a look and see what the finished soup can look like. I made this soup a little bit earlier. But it kind of has that really nice, different colors. It'll have the tomatoes, the white beans, and the spinach. And depending on when you add the spinach, it might cook in and get a little darker, but it can also be pretty fresh. And you can just top it off with a little Parmesan cheese if you like. So it's a real simple soup, not too many ingredients, and it's a nice one to have on hand in the wintertime.